The numbers behind the border crisis. Most undocumented immigrants in the U.S. originally crossed the southern border, a reality that has fueled decades of political debate and policy shifts. However, contrary to common perception, illegal crossings have actually declined significantly since the late 1990s. This drop can be attributed to a combination of increased border security measures, expanded surveillance technology, and changing migration patterns driven by economic and political factors. Yet, despite the reduction in new arrivals through illegal crossings, the total number of undocumented immigrants in the country has surged, more than tripling in the same period. A significant portion of these individuals has become deeply integrated into the U.S. workforce, filling roles that are crucial to the nation's economy. Today, at least 5% of all American workers are undocumented, with certain industries relying on them to an even greater extent. In Texas, nearly a quarter of all construction workers fall into this category, while nationwide, half of all farm laborers are undocumented immigrants. Their contributions go beyond mere statistics. They form the backbone of industries that sustain the country's infrastructure, food supply, and economic growth. From a business perspective, the reliance on affordable labor is undeniable. Undocumented workers often take on jobs that many American citizens are unwilling to do, keeping costs low and productivity high. This raises an intriguing contradiction. Would Donald Trump, the businessman, who has built his career on maximizing profit and efficiency, truly want to remove such a vital economic force? Or is his aggressive push for mass deportation driven by deeper political motives rather than practical economic concerns? His public rhetoric on immigration has often emphasized border security and nationalism, yet the economic implications of mass deportation could be severe. Removing millions of workers from industries that depend on them could lead to labor shortages, increased costs, and disruptions in sectors that many Americans rely on daily. In reality, the intersection of immigration policy and business interests is far more complex than simple campaign slogans suggest. The bigger picture: global immigration trends. Worldwide, the undocumented immigrant population is estimated to be between 30 and 40 million people, with around 14 million residing in the U.S. By contrast, Canada only has between 20,000 and 200,000 undocumented immigrants. This stark difference raises a crucial question. What has made the U.S. the primary destination for undocumented workers? One of the biggest factors is the sheer size and accessibility of the U.S. economy. As the world's largest economy, the United States offers a vast labor market with countless opportunities, especially in industries that rely on low-wage, manual labor, such as agriculture, construction, and hospitality. These sectors often have labor shortages that undocumented workers help fill, making the country a magnet for those seeking better economic prospects. Geography also plays a major role. The U.S. shares a long, easily traversable land border with Mexico, from which a significant portion of undocumented immigrants originate. This contrasts with Canada, which is geographically isolated from most migration flows, making unauthorized entry far more difficult. The relatively harsh climate of Canada also makes it less attractive for seasonal agricultural workers who prefer to migrate to warmer regions where year-round work is available. Additionally, the historical and political landscape of the U.S. has contributed to its high undocumented population. Decades of inconsistent immigration policies, combined with a backlog in legal immigration processing, have led many individuals to enter the country without documentation or overstay their visas. The U.S. has also had strong migration ties with Latin America due to economic partnerships, past political interventions, and family reunification efforts. Many immigrants choose the U.S. because of existing family networks and communities that provide support. Finally, enforcement approaches differ between the two countries. While the U.S. has struggled with balancing strict immigration enforcement with economic demands, Canada has a more selective immigration system that prioritizes skilled labor and offers pathways for temporary workers. This structured approach reduces the need for people to migrate illegally. Ultimately, the combination of economic opportunity, geographic accessibility, historical migration patterns, and policy inefficiencies has made the U.S. the leading destination for undocumented workers, while Canada remains a much less common choice. How border security transformed immigration. To understand Trump's strategy, we need to examine the evolution of U.S. border enforcement. In the early 1990s, crossing from Mexico into the U.S. was relatively easy. Seasonal laborers frequently traveled back and forth with minimal risk, taking advantage of a loosely monitored border. However, this dynamic shifted dramatically when an economic crisis in Mexico led to a massive surge in illegal crossings, quadrupling the numbers almost overnight. At that time, the San Diego border sector was the busiest entry point, with places like Imperial Beach accounting for nearly a quarter of all illegal crossings. Meanwhile, El Paso saw a staggering 15-fold increase in crossings, overwhelming local enforcement. In response, authorities launched a bold experiment. Instead of tracking down migrants who had already crossed, they focused on preventing entry in the first place. This approach triggered a seismic shift in border policy. Walls and fences were built, Border Patrol staffing surged, and new enforcement strategies, including surveillance technology and vehicle barriers, were implemented. The immediate results were striking. In targeted areas, crossings dropped within weeks. Encouraged by this success, the U.S. adopted a nationwide strategy known as prevention through deterrence. The idea was simple. Make border crossings so difficult, costly, and dangerous that migrants would reconsider attempting them. Over the next 2 decades, this strategy reshaped the border landscape. The government fortified urban entry points, funneling migrants toward remote desert regions where crossing was far more hazardous. The logic was that extreme conditions, ruthless terrain, exposure to the elements, and increased patrol presence would act as natural deterrents. And for a time, the numbers reflected success. Illegal crossings dropped by 75% between 2000 and 2020. Yet this approach had unintended consequences. As it became harder to cross back and forth, many undocumented workers who once traveled seasonally opted to stay permanently. Human smuggling networks grew more sophisticated, increasing the cost and risk for migrants. At the same time, shifting economic and political conditions in Central America and beyond spurred new waves of asylum seekers, who could not be deterred as easily by traditional border enforcement. Trump's hardline stance on immigration builds on this history, but takes it a step further. His rhetoric goes beyond deterrence, embracing mass deportation, strict visa policies, and expanded interior enforcement. However, the real question remains, is this about security or is it about politics? The evolution of U.S. border policy suggests that enforcement alone has never been a perfect solution. So why does Trump continue to push for an even harsher approach?